And welcome back. I'm Bill English, the publisher here at Bible in Business. Today you're catching us again in another series called Building Healthy Partnerships. And we are in the 7th of a 10-part series on helping business owners create healthy partnerships and what things that they should think about before they start to develop a partnership and enter into one. Today's topic is compensation. And that's a difficult topic within partnerships, and we're going to tackle some of the core issues about compensation today. This content is taken from Chapter 4 in my book, A Christian Theology of Business Ownership, an introduction for Christian entrepreneurs on what the Bible says about owning a business. But before we get started here today, what I'd like to do is just invite you to head over to BibleandBusiness.com and check out my articles, my podcasts, other tools and surveys that I have going. And I'd also like to ask for you to take a moment and just subscribe to this YouTube channel. That way you can stay up to date about the new videos that I'm going to be doing. In case you didn't know this, I am teaching my way through my entire book on a Christian theology of business ownership. And I have another book coming out here soon. Now this is March of 2022, so it should be out by the May to June timeframe. And that is called, tentatively right now, it's called The 30 Sayings of Wisdom for Business Owners, taken from Proverbs chapter 22, verses 17 through the end of chapter 24. And there I've taken the 30 sayings of wisdom and I've applied them to business leadership and business ownership. I'll also be teaching my way through that book on my YouTube channel here. So if you pick up a copy of my book at Amazon or Kobo or wherever you want to pick it up, you can always come back and watch the videos associated with each section in my book, and I hope you'll do that. So thank you for joining me. Let's get going. Let's talk about compensation. Before we really talk about compensation, though, we really need to understand the 4 roles in most businesses because these roles get compensated differently. So there's always 4 roles in most businesses. You have the shareholders or the owners. And by the way, I assume most businesses are incorporated. If you have partnerships, then you may just have units or percentage of ownership. And of course, a sole proprietor owns everything anyways. But there's no shares to own because they're not incorporated. So you have the shareholders who are the owner. You have board of director members, or what we call board members. You have corporate officers, and you have employees. Those are the 4 roles that you will have in any business. And in small businesses, oftentimes the founder of the business owns, or not owns, but fulfills all 4 roles. The founder of the business is the person who is they're the owner, they're the shareholder, and probably on paper when they incorporated, they may have named themselves and their spouse or maybe some kids or a close friend as board of director members, because most states require that you have a board of directors for a corporation. And then most states also require that you have a corporate officer, like a president or a treasurer or a secretary. And a lot of times the people who are incorporating to start their business, they just take on all the officer roles. And then, of course, they're also paid through the business, so they're also an employee. So while a lot of people in smaller businesses who have LLCs or they have C Corps or maybe they've elected the S Corp pass-through election through the IRS, while a lot of them have done this paperwork with a lawyer or online, they don't take it seriously. The difference between a shareholder, a board member, a corporate officer, and an employee. But the larger the business grows, the more this governance aspect comes into play, and the more the owners have to pay attention to who's on the board, who's the corporate officer, what roles are they fulfilling, that kind of thing. So when it comes to compensation, you kind of see 2 bolded, italicized sentences here at the bottom. And I want to highlight these. Being an owner isn't a job. It is a role. Okay? We're going to come back to that. Compensation should be paid for work and work product and work results, not for simply existing. So if you're an owner and you're not working in the business and you're pulling out a salary, we're going to talk about that scenario here in just a moment. But I am of the firm belief that compensation should be paid for work performed, adequate work performed, not simply because you are taking up space and breathing air on the face of God's green earth. Okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Shareholder, or what I call owner notes. For owners, the larger financial picture includes the ability to shoulder the financial risk of the business during a downturn. When there's a loss, someone has to pay. When a business loses money, someone has to pay. And if you're looking at going into a partnership with somebody else or a few other people who cannot share in the financial risks, then they shouldn't be partners. They shouldn't be at the ownership level. Because partners, the owners, the shareholders, end up being the people who pay when there is a loss in the business. So you should take a look at, everybody should get their credit scores and share them. Everybody should share their personal financial information so that all the partners know going in who has what type of financial capability, and quite frankly, who can shoulder the risk of a financial loss or a financial downturn. Now, there's a difference between compensation and equity. Employees get compensated, equity takes profits. So equity and compensation work very, very differently. The salary or the bonus aspect of compensation, again, should be based on performance and a particular job within the company. Your partner's compensation does not need to be equal in order for the partner's compensation to be fair. So let's say, for example, that you have two gals going into business together, and they're going to start a manufacturing company. And one gal is really good at processes and building culture and enjoys the balance sheet, the income statement, the accounting aspect, kind of that whole business side. But the other gal really enjoys building relationships for sales to bring in new business, and she enjoys the customer aspect and all this. That could probably make, on paper, a pretty good partnership, right? But the person who does the sales usually gets paid more than the person who does the back office. It's just the way it is. I've owned a number of businesses in my day, and one of the businesses that I owned was a training company. The highest paid people in my training company were my salesmen. It was not me, and it was not my other partner. It was our salespeople. They were the highest paid people because without them, you don't have business. You don't have anything. And I'm not good at sales. I'm not going to go out and find new customers. It's just not a strength of mine, right? So partner compensation, depending on their role in the business, does not need to be equal in order to be fair. And I'll also say this, that again, being an owner isn't a role. So you don't get paid simply to be an owner. Equity, the owners share in the profits and the losses. The way that the owners get compensated, if they're not doing anything in the business and they simply own shares, then the way they get compensated is through the profits in the business. They enjoy the rewards of profits, and they share in the agony of losses financially. That's what equity does. So remember that equity or ownership, I use equity and ownership interchangeably here, those terms. Equity and compensation for work very, very differently. Equity and compensation are simply two different things. Now, if you hand your business, there's some comments here about compensation relative to retirement and succession planning. If you plan to hand your business to a son or a daughter or a third party, do not expect to be compensated out of your business for the rest of your life. Now, what you can do is hand off day-to-day management and retain ownership, and then get money through the profits on a quarterly or a semi-annual or an annual basis, right? But do not expect to continue to have your salary paid to you for the rest of your life. even if that's part of the buyout agreement. I like buyout agreements to be different than that, but that's a whole nother conversation. If you're not working in the business, then you shouldn't receive a salary. And this is a strong opinion of mine. If you own the business, you take the profits if you desire to do so. But as much as possible, when you're younger and you're growing this business over, say, a 20 or 30-year period, as much as possible, take money out of your business along the way and set it aside as savings for the future. That way, when you get to 60, 65, 70, 75, and you decide you want to pass the business along to your kids, if you want to, you don't have to, but if you want to, you can hand it to them at lower than market value because you've already taken value out of the business and you have enough to live on. And by the way, how much is enough to live on? I've covered this in a previous video and in my book, A Christian Theology of Business Ownership. You should save enough to cover reasonable expenses in the future. But anything beyond that, anything that are expected expenses in the future for saving, let's say your future expenses, I'll just pull a number out of the air, is $2 million. Then if you save $4 million, then you're really hoarding $2 million. You ought to be giving the rest of it away. Because wealth is a renewable resource, and your dependence for your what you need on your daily bread kind of thing. Give me neither poverty nor riches in Proverbs, but give me my daily bread. And in Matthew 6, it says, don't worry about tomorrow. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added unto you. What they're really saying is don't put your faith and trust and confidence in your 401k or in your investments to make sure that you're financially stable and independent for the rest of your life. That is not a biblical Christian worldview. You need to think theologically about this stuff. So save for the future, save enough to cover your future expenses, and then give the rest away. And you can also, by the way, if you do this, be able to sell the business to your kids at a lower price. And this means, by the way, that you're going to have to live at a standard of living well below what you probably could afford in order to save for the future. Here's Proverbs 27:23-27. Know well the condition of your flocks and pay attention to your herds. For riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure to all generations. When the grass disappears, the new growth is seen, and the herbs of the mountains are gathered in. The lambs will be for your clothing, the goats will bring the price of a field, and there will be goat's milk enough for your food, for the food of your household and the sustenance of your maidens. Just a couple of notes here that's a follow-on to what I've been teaching so far. If you manage your business assets well in the present, and that includes taking some money off the table on a regular basis and then putting it aside for the future, then your assets will provide for you in the future. It is important to note in this passage that this passage really does discuss your flocks, your revenue-generating assets, not somebody else's. So when you pass your business on to your children or to another owner, it's no longer your asset. It's no longer your business. And as such, you shouldn't expect it to provide you income for the balance of your life. If that's where you're at, and I've met a lot of business owners who are in this boat, where they pass the business along to their kids and they expected a salary out of the business for the rest of their lives, and the kids ran it into the ground, and at age 65 or 70 or 75, the parents had to go back to work. Probably at Target or someplace like that, just to make enough money to sustain themselves. Because they didn't save for the future, and they were counting on their business to compensate them for life. That is not the way to do this. It just isn't. Instead, you should sell your business to your children, and then it's your money, your revenue-generating assets, which will provide for your needs. Now, a lot of times, kids can't afford it. They can't afford the money. You started the business with no money down, essentially, and you grew it, and now it has maybe I know of one situation we're working with where the business is valued in the $30 to $35 million range. There's 5 kids. There's no possible way those 5 kids are going to come up with $35 million to buy it cash on the barrelhead. But maybe they can come up with a few million, because they've done pretty well. The kids have. They could probably come up with $5 million, and dad could probably finance another 10. And then you get an SBA or some kind of an equity loan in the $10 to $15 million range. You can kind of hobble together some financing, or you find other investors to come in and invest who will take money out over the next 7 to 10 years, and that way the kids are able to buy it. But it's not an easy thing. What you do not want to do is what one owner did. He ended up giving 42% of the business to his son. And then when it came time for him to retire, he wanted his son to pay for that 42%. And it caused a huge rift between them, because the son's saying, wait a minute, you gave me this stock. And now, 7 or 8 years later, you want me to turn around and pay you $1 million for it? I'm not going to do that. It's my stock. You gave it to me, Dad. I'm not going to do this. And so, again, Dad hadn't saved enough for the future. He hadn't pulled money out of his asset to save for the future. And he wanted the business to compensate him simply for existence. And it just wasn't going to work that way. And I don't know if they ever reconciled. I'm not sure that father and son are even speaking today. So I would say that you sell it, but if you have saved enough for the future, you can sell the business at a lower than fair market price, right? So maybe that $30 million, if the dad has tons of money, he has way more than what I'll ever have. If he wanted to, he could sell it to his children for, say, 10 or 15 million. But it's important that they buy it, that they have some skin in the game, and that there is a time when the business is no longer yours. It belongs to your kids. You don't depend on that business for compensation. You now depend on your assets, your flocks, to provide for your needs. Now, when it comes to compensation between partners, if you don't know what to pay, I suggest that you engage a third-party firm to help evaluate companies of similar size in your community who are doing similar things of what you're doing, and look at what a CEO earns and what minority partners or majority partners earn, or what other roles earn. Just do a compensation analysis. That will help you guys understand probably what's fair market there. So I've kind of gone over these warning signs already, but I want to go over them again. Do not confuse being an owner with getting a paycheck. Those are two different things. The owner is a role, not a job. A paycheck is for work performed. If you want to remain an owner, that's fine. Just understand that you should be pulling out profits rather than getting a paycheck. And be sure that your partner agreement discusses compensation and what happens when a partner is not producing at expected levels. So, in review, your paycheck as partners should be based on performance. Profit taking should be based on annual profits and is in addition to your paycheck. So the paychecks need not be equal, but the profit taking should be based on percentage of ownership. Equity and compensation work differently. Don't confuse them, and make sure your partner agreement covers the what-ifs of compensation. In our next episode, we're going to be looking at the really difficult aspect of conflict. How do we resolve conflict within partners? And is this person that you're thinking about forming a partnership with, are they even able to engage in conflict resolution, or do they just avoid it altogether? So I hope you'll join me for that episode on conflict. For today, I want to thank you for coming here and watching this episode on compensation. And like I said, head over to BibleandBusiness.com, take a look at what I have over there, and make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel. I would certainly appreciate it. I'm Bill English, the publisher here at Bible and Business. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you go out and make it a great day.